In this section, we're going to talk about conventional loans. The most common situation you're likely to encounter is a loan that has to be paid back in equal periodic installments, and most car or house payments are like this. In a conventional loan, each payment pays the current interest and also repays part of the principal. Your payments are said to amortize or pay back the loan. So let's look at a few key points about conventional loans. As you make payments, the principal on the loan is reduced. So with each payment period, there is less interest owed, and less of each payment goes to the interest, and more goes towards paying off the principal of the loan. You can also think of paying off the loan as making payments to a savings account that earns interest at the same rate as the loan. This is the formula for loan payments for a conventional loan. So if you have a conventional loan where you've borrowed P dollars at a nominal annual interest rate R with M compounding periods per year for T years, then you can pay that loan off by uniform payments at the end of each compounding period in the amount D given by this formula here. So this is pretty complicated. We've got a fraction on the top of a fraction, and then on the bottom we've got more parentheses and fractions and exponents. So this is a complicated formula, and you want to be careful when entering it into a calculator. So I'm just going to write down here at the bottom what this might look like as you're entering it into a calculator, if your calculator allows you to type everything in and use parentheses. So I'm just going to write it in straight line form. So D is going to be equal to P parentheses, and then I'm going to use different colors for the inner parentheses here. So for the top part of my fraction, I'm going to have R divided by M inside its own set of parentheses. And then that's going to be divided by the bottom part of the fraction, which is also going to be in parentheses, and I'll put that in green. So I'll have 1 minus, and then inside there I've got another set of parentheses, so we'll try orange for that. So I'll have 1 plus, I'm going to have yet another set of parentheses for my R divided by M here, so maybe I'll go with light blue for this one. R divided by M. So now I need to close the parentheses that I started before the 1 plus. And then I've got an exponent here. So for some calculators, you can type in a caret symbol, which is just this little up arrow for an exponent. And then I'm going to have more parentheses for my exponent, because inside there I've got negative M times T. And I'll close those parentheses. Now I need to close my green parentheses so I can group the whole bottom part of the fraction together. And then finally I've got to close my first parentheses rather than closing the whole fraction. So this is pretty complicated, but if you want to follow this when you try and type this into your calculator, that should help you out a little bit. So let's look at an example of buying a house. Suppose you buy a house with a $100,000 loan to be paid off over 30 years in equal monthly installments. Suppose that the interest rate for the loan is 6%, and we want to figure out how much is your monthly payment. So I've got the formula here for monthly payment. So let's figure out what all of these quantities in here are. So P is the loan amount, which was $100,000. R is my interest rate is 6%, so put a couple zeros out front here, and if I convert that to a decimal by moving it over 2 places, that's going to be equal to 0.06. What about M? M is the compounding period, and here I'm making monthly payments, and for a conventional loan, the interest is compounded each payment period, so I've got interest compounded monthly, which means I'm going to have 12 compounding periods per year. So M is equal to 12. And finally, I need to know what T is, and T is the period of the loan. I've got a 30-year loan, so T is going to be equal to 30. So now I can go ahead and plug that all in here. So this is going to be a little messy. I get 100,000 times, on the top I'm going to have R, which is 0.06 divided by 12. On the bottom I'm going to have a whole long expression 1 minus parentheses 1 plus R divided by M, 0.06 divided by 12, and that's going to be to the power negative M times T, so negative 12 times 30. So that's everything in my formula. So if I go ahead and put that into my calculator, I'm going to get a monthly payment for this mortgage of $599.55. Alright. So let's talk a little bit more about types of loans. You might know that when you buy a home, you have several options for the mortgage, and these are some of the common options. You can get a conventional 30-year mortgage with a fixed interest rate, or a conventional 15-year mortgage, or an adjustable rate mortgage for either length of time, but this kind of mortgage is going to have an interest rate that can go up or down, so your payments might change over time. If you get a conventional mortgage with an interest rate of 4%, for a 15-year mortgage, the payments for that mortgage are going to be 55% more than they would be if you got a 30-year mortgage. So even though the monthly payment here is more for the shorter 15-year mortgage, you're paying those payments for only half as long, so overall you're going to end up paying less money. So if you have a $200,000 mortgage at 5%, the amount of interest you would pay for a 30-year mortgage is $187,000, but you would only pay $85,000 in interest if you had the mortgage for 15 years instead of 30. So taking the shorter term mortgage would actually save you a little over $100,000 in interest, but you'd still be making a larger monthly payment, so you have to weigh the pros and cons of the different types of mortgages. Let's talk a little bit more about adjustable rate mortgages. Often, adjustable rate mortgages, or ARMs, have a substantially lower initial interest rate than a conventional fixed rate mortgage. So they start out with a lower interest rate, but that interest rate could go up or down with the economy. And usually the rate is limited, so it can be raised or lowered only every year or two and by a limited percentage. So that gives you a little bit of a security that your payments on your mortgage won't fluctuate too wildly, even though they can change over time. One reason an adjustable rate mortgage might be attractive is if you plan to pay off the mortgage or to sell the house after only a few years, so there's not too much risk of your mortgage payments changing too much, and you start out with a lower interest rate, so you start out with lower payments. You might be more interested in a conventional fixed rate mortgage if you're planning to keep the house for a longer time, because it gives you more security about knowing what your mortgage payment is going to be. Finally, I want to talk a little bit about equity. And equity is the amount of principal of a loan that has been repaid. So when you talk about equity for your home mortgage, equity is technically the amount of the house that you own. So you might own $100,000 worth of the house, but still owe the bank $50,000. So your equity would be $100,000. Because very few mortgages are held for the full term, it's sometimes useful to compare the status of mortgages after 5 years. And 5 years is the median length of time that Americans remain in a home. So that's the average amount of time that people will be paying their mortgage for. So if we look at this chart, we can see the equity on a $200,000 mortgage after 5 years. You can see that if you've got a 15-year loan, you're going to have a lot more equity after 5 years, somewhere between $54,000 and $40,000. Whereas if you go with the 30-year loan, you're going to have a lot less equity after 5 years, somewhere between $19,000 and $8,000. And you can see that the interest rate here is affecting how much equity you have in your home. So the higher your interest rate is, the lower equity you're going to accrue over the years. And that's the end of this section, things you should know. You should be able to calculate payments for conventional loans given the principal, nominal annual rate, number of compounding periods, and the length of the loan. And you should be able to compare the advantages and disadvantages of different types of mortgage.